A man stands before a crowd. His hands are bound. The sentence has been spoken. The crowd watches in silence. Some nod. Others turn away. No one questions what is about to happen. They call it justice. But what is justice? The word rolls off our tongues with ease. We demand it. We seek it. We believe we know it when we see it. Yet for thousands of years, humanity has struggled to define this single concept. Wars have been fought over it. Empires have crumbled in its name. Civilizations have risen by claiming to possess it. This is the story of justice. Not the justice of courtrooms and legal codes. Not the justice of judges and juries. But justice itself. The idea. The philosophy. The impossible dream that has shaped every human society since the first person looked at another and asked a simple question. Is this fair? What you are about to witness is a journey through time, through minds, through the very foundation of human civilization. Because justice is not just a concept, it is the invisible thread that holds society together. And when that thread breaks, everything falls apart. The birth of an idea. 4,000 years ago, in ancient Mesopotamia, a king named Hammurabi carved words into black stone. 282 laws, each one a declaration. Each one an attempt to answer the question that had plagued humanity since the dawn of consciousness. How do we live together? The Code of Hammurabi was not the first legal system, but it was among the first to be written down, to be made permanent, to be displayed for all to see. The message was clear. Justice was no longer the whim of the powerful. It was law. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. We know these words. They echo through history, but they represent something far more profound than vengeance. They represent proportion, the idea that punishment must match the crime, that justice requires balance, that there is a natural order to right and wrong. This was revolutionary. Before codified law, justice was arbitrary. The strong dominated the weak, the powerful punished without reason. There were no rules, no standards, no way to predict what would happen when conflict arose. Hammurabi changed that. Not perfectly, not fairly by modern standards. His code distinguished between social classes. A nobleman who lost an eye received different compensation than a slave. But it was a beginning. A recognition that justice needed structure, that society required agreement on what was acceptable and what was not. The Mesopotamians were not alone. Across the ancient world, civilizations grappled with the same questions. In Egypt, the concept of Ma'at represented cosmic balance, truth, justice, and order all intertwined. The pharaoh was not just a ruler. He was the guardian of Ma'at. His duty was to maintain justice not just among people, but in the universe itself. In China, Confucius spoke of ritual and righteousness. Justice was not about punishment, it was about harmony, about knowing your place in society, about fulfilling your role with honor and respect. A just society was an orderly society, one where everyone understood their duties and performed them without complaint. But it was in ancient Athens that justice transformed from divine mandate into philosophical question. The philosopher's dilemma. Athens, the 5th century before Common Era. Democracy is young, philosophy is younger, and in the marketplace men gather to argue about the nature of reality itself. Socrates walks among them. He asks questions, simple questions, questions that seem innocent until you try to answer them. Questions like, what is justice? His student Plato would later write down these conversations. In the Republic, Plato presents justice not as a legal code or social contract, but as an ideal, a perfect form that exists beyond human understanding. We see only shadows of true justice. We argue about fairness and rights, but we are arguing about reflections, imperfect copies of something pure and eternal. Plato's justice is harmony, the soul in balance, the state in balance, each part performing its proper function, the rational mind ruling the spirit and appetites, the philosopher kings ruling the warriors and producers. Justice is not equal treatment. It is right order, everything in its place. This vision shaped Western thought for 2,000 years, but it also revealed something troubling. If justice is perfect order, Who decides what that order looks like? Plato's student Aristotle saw the problem. He approached justice differently. Justice is not a divine ideal. It is practical. It is achievable. It comes in two forms, distributive and corrective. Distributive justice divides resources according to merit. Not everyone receives the same. The excellent receive more. The mediocre receive less. This is not unfair. This is proportional. This is natural. Corrective justice restores balance when wrongs occur. If I steal from you, I must return what I took. If I harm you, I must compensate you. The goal is not punishment for its own sake. The goal is restoration, making whole what was broken. Aristotle's justice is grounded in reality, in human nature, in the messy complexity of actual societies. It acknowledges that perfect justice is impossible, but approximate justice is necessary. Yet even as Aristotle wrote these words, his society practiced slavery, denied rights to women, executed Socrates for asking too many questions. The gap between philosophical justice and practical justice was not just wide, it was a chasm. The weight of empires. Rome did not concern itself with philosophical abstractions. Rome built roads, aqueducts, an empire that stretched from Britain to Mesopotamia, and to hold that empire together, Rome built something else. Legal system so comprehensive it would outlast the empire itself. Roman law was pragmatic. It distinguished between public and private offenses, between civil and criminal matters. It created procedures, standards of evidence, rights of the accused, the assumption of innocence, the requirement of proof beyond reasonable doubt. These were not philosophical ideals. These were tools, mechanisms to manage a vast and diverse population. But in creating these tools, Rome embedded certain assumptions about justice into the very structure of Western civilization. Justice requires process. Justice requires evidence. Justice requires the ability to defend yourself. These ideas seem obvious now. They were not obvious then. They were innovations, legal technologies that would shape every system that came after. When Rome fell, the legal code survived. Byzantine emperors preserved it. Medieval scholars studied it. It became the foundation for law across Europe. Justice, at least in the Western tradition, became inseparable from these Roman concepts. But Rome's influence was not the only force shaping ideas of justice. In the Middle East, the Prophet Muhammad was receiving revelations that would transform the world. Islamic law, Sharia, approached justice as divine command. The Quran laid out specific punishments for specific crimes, but it also emphasized mercy, forgiveness. The judge was not just an enforcer of law, the judge was a seeker of truth, guided by both reason and revelation. Islamic scholars developed jurisprudence of extraordinary sophistication. They debated evidence and testimony. They considered intent and circumstance. They created legal frameworks that could adapt to new situations while remaining faithful to sacred text. Justice was not static, it was interpretive. It required wisdom, not just knowledge. In medieval Europe, Christianity offered a different vision. Justice was not just earthly, it was cosmic. Every wrong would be righted. Every sin would be punished. If not in this life, then in the next. The ultimate judge was not human, it was God. This belief had profound consequences. It meant earthly justice was always incomplete, always flawed, always subject to divine correction. It also meant that suffering could be reinterpreted. The poor and oppressed might seem to lack justice in this world, but in the next world the hierarchy would reverse. The last would be first, the first would be last. Was this justice? Or was it a rationalization for injustice? A way to maintain social order by promising future rewards for present suffering? The question would haunt Christianity for centuries. The Enlightenment Revolution, Europe. The 17th century. Science is challenging scripture, reason is challenging tradition, and philosophers are asking dangerous questions about power, authority, and rights. Thomas Hobbes looked at society and saw chaos barely contained. Humans in their natural state are not noble. They are not peaceful. They are at war. Every person against every other person. Life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish and short. Justice does not exist in nature. It is created by agreement, by social contract. We give up our freedom to do whatever we want. In exchange, we receive protection, security, the ability to live without constant fear. The sovereign enforces the contract. The sovereign is justice. This was a radical idea. Justice was not divine. It was not natural. It was artificial, a human invention. And like any invention, it could be improved or destroyed. John Locke offered a different vision. Humans in nature have rights, life, liberty, and property. These rights exist before government, before law, before society. They are natural, inalienable, and the purpose of government is to protect them. Justice, in Locke's view, is respect for these natural rights. When government violates them, it loses legitimacy. The people have not just the right, but the duty to resist, to rebel, to create new government that will honor the contract. These ideas were not just theoretical. They became revolutionary. They inspired colonial Americans to declare independence. They inspired the French to storm the Bastille. They inspired generations of people to demand rights, to fight oppression, to insist that justice was not whatever the powerful said it was. But they also raised new questions. What are these natural rights? Where do they come from? Are they truly universal? Or are they the product of specific cultural and historical circumstances? Immanuel Kant attempted to answer by grounding justice in pure reason. The moral law is not based on consequences or feelings. It is based on logic, on consistency, on the categorical imperative. Act only according to that maxim by which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. Justice is treating people as ends in themselves, never merely as means. It is respecting the autonomy and dignity of every rational being. It does not matter if they are powerful or weak, rich or poor, of your tribe or another. They are human. That is enough. Kant's justice is austere, uncompromising. It demands that we follow moral law regardless of consequences, even if telling the truth leads to harm, even if keeping a promise costs us everything, because justice is not about outcomes, it is about duty. Jeremy Bentham found this absurd. Natural rights are nonsense on stilts. Duty for duty's sake is moral fanaticism. Justice is much simpler. It is utility. The greatest happiness for the greatest number. An action is just if it increases overall happiness, unjust if it decreases it. There is no need for abstract principles or divine commands. There is only the calculation, pain versus pleasure, suffering versus joy. Add it up. Choose the option that produces the best result. Utilitarianism offered a clear, practical standard, but it also opened the door to troubling possibilities. If justice is maximum happiness, what happens to minorities, to individuals? If torturing one person would save 1,000, is it just? If enslaving a few would benefit the many, is it required? These were not just thought experiments. These were questions societies had to answer. The modern crisis. The 20th century forced humanity to confront justice in ways previous generations could not imagine. 2 world wars, the Holocaust, colonialism, nuclear weapons, technologies of mass destruction, ideologies of mass murder. How do you apply ancient concepts of justice to modern atrocities? How do you punish crimes so vast they defy comprehension? How do you restore balance when millions have been killed? The Nuremberg trials attempted to answer. Nazi leaders were tried for crimes against humanity, for genocide, for aggressive war. The defendants argued they were following orders, following the law of their nation. They had not violated German law. They had upheld it. The prosecutors responded, "There is a law above national law, a justice beyond legal codes, natural law, human rights. Crimes against humanity are crimes regardless of what any government says. Some things are wrong absolutely, universally, without exception." This was a return to ancient ideas dressed in modern language. Justice as cosmic order, as divine mandate, as natural law, but now enforced through international tribunals, through conventions and treaties, through the United Nations and International Criminal Court. Yet the question remained, who defines these universal principles? Who enforces them? And why do the powerful rarely face the same justice as the weak? In the United States, the civil rights movement forced a reckoning with a different form of injustice: legal segregation, systemic discrimination, the denial of rights based on race. The law itself was unjust. The state itself was unjust. What do you do when the system designed to deliver justice is the source of injustice? Martin Luther King Jr. answered by distinguishing just and unjust laws. A just law is consistent with moral law. An unjust law is inconsistent with moral law. A just law uplifts human personality. An unjust law degrades it. We have not just the right but the moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. This was civil disobedience, peaceful resistance, breaking the law in the name of justice, and it worked. Not perfectly, not completely, but it moved society. It changed minds. It reformed laws. Meanwhile, in universities, philosopher John Rawls was developing a new theory of justice as fairness. Imagine you are designing a society, but you do not know what position you will occupy in that society. You might be rich or poor, healthy or sick, privileged or marginalized. Behind this veil of ignorance, what principles would you choose? Rawls argued you would choose two principles. First, equal basic liberties for all. Second, social and economic inequalities are acceptable only if they benefit the least advantaged members of society and are attached to positions open to all under fair equality of opportunity. This was justice as impartiality. Justice is what rational people would agree to if they could not rig the system in their favor. It was elegant, influential, and controversial. Critics argued that justice is not about hypothetical agreements. It is about actual communities, real traditions, lived experiences. Feminist philosophers pointed out that traditional justice theory ignored the private sphere, the family, care work, unpaid labor, women's experiences. Justice is not just about rights and procedures. It is about relationships, responsibilities, recognition. Post-colonial thinkers argued that Western concepts of justice had been imposed on the rest of the world through violence and domination, that what we call universal human rights are actually particular cultural values, that true justice requires listening to diverse voices, respecting different traditions, acknowledging historical wrongs. The conversation had exploded. Justice was no longer a single idea. It was many ideas, competing, contradicting, each claiming truth, each demanding attention. The unsolved equation. Today, we face forms of injustice our ancestors could not have imagined. Climate change that will devastate the poor while the rich remain comfortable. Artificial intelligence that may replace human workers. Genetic engineering that could create biological inequality. Global capitalism that concentrates wealth beyond the dreams of ancient emperors. How do we apply ancient wisdom to problems that did not exist a generation ago? How do we balance individual rights against collective survival? How do we deliver justice when the consequences of our actions will not appear for decades, when the victims are not yet born? Some argue for restorative justice, moving beyond punishment to healing, bringing together offender and victim, focusing on repair rather than retribution. This approach draws on indigenous traditions, on practices that predate modern legal systems, on the idea that justice should restore community, not just enforce rules. Others advocate for transformative justice, changing the systems that produce injustice in the first place, addressing root causes, dismantling structures of oppression. This is not reform, this is revolution. Justice not as individual fairness, but as collective liberation. Still others insist on retributive justice. The guilty must be punished, not for utility, not for restoration, but because punishment is what justice requires, because some debts can only be paid through suffering, because society must express its condemnation of evil. The debate continues. The questions multiply. The answers remain elusive, because here is the truth humanity has learned over 4,000 years of civilization. Justice is not one thing. It is many things. It is balance and proportion. It is natural rights and social contract. It is utility and dignity. It is process and outcome. It is individual and collective. It is local and universal. Justice is the impossible standard we set for ourselves, the ideal we can never reach but cannot stop pursuing, the measure by which we judge society and find it wanting, again and again and again. Every legal code is imperfect. Every principle has exceptions. Every system fails someone. Yet we continue to seek justice, to demand it, to fight for it, because without justice, we have nothing. Without justice, society is just organized violence. Might makes right. The strong prey on the weak, and humanity descends into the chaos we have spent millennia trying to escape. The eternal question. 4,000 years, countless philosophers, infinite debates, and we still cannot agree on what justice means. Maybe that is the point. Maybe justice is not something to be discovered. Maybe it is something to be created, negotiated, fought for, lost and won and lost again. Maybe justice is not a destination. It is a direction, not a state of being but a process of becoming. The ancient Mesopotamians carved their laws in stone. We write ours in code, digital, editable, subject to change. Our justice is not permanent. It is evolving, like us, like our societies, like our understanding of what it means to be human. But evolution is not progress. History does not move in a straight line toward enlightenment. Societies advance and regress. Rights are won and lost. Justice emerges and collapses. The cycle repeats, which brings us back to the beginning, to the man standing before the crowd, hands bound, sentence spoken, about to receive what they call justice. Is it justice? That depends on who you ask, on what theory you believe, on what values you hold, on where you stand, on when you live. Hammurabi would have one answer, Plato another, Aristotle a third. Kant would disagree with Bentham. Rawls would debate with feminists. Every philosopher has a theory. Every theory has flaws. Every flaw reveals the gap between what justice is and what justice should be. And in that gap we live. We struggle. We build imperfect systems and watch them fail. We create laws and break them. We establish courts and corrupt them. We declare rights and violate them. We speak of equality and practice discrimination. We demand fairness and rig the game. Because justice is hard. Justice costs. Justice requires us to treat others as we wish to be treated, to give up advantages we enjoy, to share power we possess, to admit when we are wrong, to change when we are comfortable, to sacrifice when we are satisfied. Justice asks everything of us, and we are only human. But maybe that is enough. Maybe the fact that we ask these questions matters more than the answers we find. Maybe the pursuit of justice is the point, the eternal reaching for something better, the refusal to accept the world as it is, the insistence that things could be different, should be different, must be different. 4,000 years, and we are still asking, what is justice? Perhaps in 4,000 more we will still be asking, still arguing, still seeking, still failing, still trying again. Because justice is not a problem to be solved. It is a tension to be managed, not an answer to be found, but a question to be lived. And as long as humans exist, as long as we live together in societies, as long as we care about right and wrong, fair and unfair, just and unjust, the question will remain, what is justice? The answer is still being written by every choice we make, every law we pass, every verdict we render, every person we help or harm, every system we build or tear down. The history of justice is not over. It is not even close to over, because the history of justice is the history of humanity itself. Our greatest aspiration, our deepest failure, our endless struggle to create a world where everyone receives what they deserve, whatever that means, wherever that leads, however long it takes. The question remains, what is justice? And in the space between the question and the answer, we find ourselves struggling, striving, never arriving, always becoming. What would you answer? What is justice to you? And more importantly, what are you willing to do to bring it into being?